Verena Voss stepped down from the wagon onto the hard Montana ground, and the first thing the rancher waiting at the gate did was look her up and down the way a buyer counts the legs on a horse he already suspects is lame. Holt Bannister stood with his thumbs hooked in his belt, his brown hat pulled low against the late sun, and when his eyes came back up to her face, he said the thing she had braced for the whole long ride from the station. "You're heavier than the letter described." She did not cry. She had decided somewhere around the age of 16 that her weeping was a private thing and no strangers to collect, and she had kept that promise to herself through worse mornings than this one. She set down the small carpet-bag she carried, and she looked back at him with the same level patience she would have used on a green colt that did not yet know whether to bolt or to listen. "The letter described my work with horses," she said, "my reading of bloodlines, and my hands. None of those are located in my waistline, Mr. Bannister." For a long moment, the only sound was the wind coming down off the high pasture and the far complaint of cattle somewhere past the barn. Holt's jaw worked once. He had expected a flinch, and a woman in the dusty blue dress had handed him an itemized inventory instead, flat and exact. Each line a thing he could go check and find true, and there was nothing in any of it he could argue with because every line of it was true. "You ride out here on the noon stage?" he asked, after the silence had stretched past comfortable. "I rode the noon stage to the Fork," Verena said, "and a freighter named Hollis brought me the last 9 miles for 2 bits and a story about every fence post we passed. He says you put in the cedar posts on the east line yourself 3 summers back, and that they'll outlast the both of us." Holt's chin came up a fraction. "Hollis talks too much." "He talks like a man who admires the work, but won't say so to your face." She picked her bag back up. "I find that's most men out here." This is the part the people who arranged the match did not understand. They had measured Verena Voss with their eyes and decided she was a burden to be palmed off, a humiliation to be delivered. They never once measured what she carried in the leather-bound ledger pressed flat against the bottom of that carpet-bag, her dead father's horse-gentling book, its pages soft as cloth from 40 years of handling, every margin crowded with his small, careful Dutch hand. They never measured the 2 weeks she had spent before she agreed to come, sitting at a borrowed table reading everything she could find about a black stallion in Montana that 2 grown men could not ride and a third had not survived. Her worth was never going to be settled by what she weighed. It was going to be settled by what she could do that not one man on this ranch could do himself, and the whole valley was about to find that out the slow, hard, undeniable way. Holt picked up her bag without asking, which surprised her, and he turned toward the house without another word about her body, which surprised her more. She followed him across the yard. A boy of about 9 stood in the open barn door watching her come, thin and brown-armed, with his dead mother's gray eyes, and he did not laugh at her. He only stared and went on staring, his eyes moving over her once and then settling on her face and holding there, the long, unblinking look a child gives to weather building on the far edge of the sky. And then he ducked back into the dark of the barn before his father could see him looking. If you have ever walked into a place where every person had already decided who you were before you said a word, then you already know the particular quiet Verena carried up those porch steps, and you already know why this story is for you. Stay with me to the end, because the woman they sent here to be a joke is going to be the only one left standing when it matters, and I want to see how far her story travels. So when you have a moment, drop the name of your town in the comments and follow along, because the turn in this one is worth the wait. The house was a widower's house, and it told on him the moment she crossed the threshold. The hearth was swept but cold. The table held one chipped plate and one cup turned upside down to keep the dust out. The arithmetic of a man who had stopped cooking for more than himself a long time ago. A woman's shawl still hung on a peg by the door, gray wool gone soft at the fringe, and nobody had taken it down, and nobody was going to ask Verena why. There was a wedding band on a length of string looped over the corner of the mantel mirror, hung up where a man could see it and not have to wear it, and she looked at it once, and then she did not look at it again. "You'll have the back room," Holt said. "Door bolts from the inside." He set her bag down inside it. "I'm not a man who needs a wife. I need a hand. There's a difference, and I'll thank you to remember it." "I'll remember it," Verena said. "You'll forgive me if I unpack the difference later. I've been on a train 2 days." He almost said something. She watched him decide not to. He went out, and she heard his boots cross the yard, and she sat down on the edge of the narrow bed and took the ledger out of her bag and held it in both hands without opening it, her thumbs moving slow along the worn edges of the cover, holding it close against her, the same as she would have held her father's own hand if she could have had it back for one more minute. Her father had died in the spring. He had been a horse-breaker in the old country, and then a horse-gentler in the new one, when his knees gave out, and he learned that you could do with patience what he had once done with a snubbing post in a fight. The ledger was the only thing of his she had wanted. Her uncle had let her take it because he did not know what it was. He thought it was a debt book. He had laughed, in fact, and told her to take her papers and her appetite to Montana and good riddance, and she had let him keep believing the ledger was nothing, the way you let a man keep believing a horse is worthless right up until you've bought it. There was a knock at the back room door so soft she nearly missed it. When she opened it, the boy was standing there, and he had a tin cup of water in both hands, held out level and careful in front of him, his arms stiff and his eyes down on the rim of it so the water would not slop over and shame him. "Pa said, 'Give you water,'" the boy said, "on account of the train." "That's kind." She took the cup. "What's your name?" "Tobias. Folks say Toby." He looked past her at the ledger on the bed, the brown leather and the worn corners. "That a Bible?" "It's better than a Bible to me," Verena said. "It's my father's. He wrote down everything he ever knew, so I wouldn't have to learn it the hard way." Toby chewed that over. "Did it work?" It was such a plain, unguarded question that it caught her under the ribs. "Some of it," she said. "Some things you have to learn the hard way no matter what's written down. Thank you for the water, Toby." He nodded once and was gone, quick and quiet as a barn cat, and she heard the screen door tap shut behind him. She did not yet know the whole shape of her uncle's scheme. She knew the edges of it. She knew Peter Voss had not arranged this marriage out of any wish to see her settled. Peter Voss did not give things away. He had heard that the Bannister place sat on 400 acres of bottomland with a creek that never ran dry, and he had heard that Holt Bannister was 3 payments behind the bank in Miles City and sinking, a widower with a dead-end horse and a debt he could not climb. Peter had done his sum. A man that far down did not need a wife so much as a final straw, and Peter had decided to be the one to send it, a useless fat bride to break what was left of a broken man, so that when the bank took the bottom land at auction, a Voss could buy it cheap and clean. He had told the matchmaker the girl was eager. He had told the girl the man was kind. He had told no one the truth, which was that he meant for both of them to fail, and to make a profit out of the failing. He had only made one mistake. He had thought Verena was the straw. The stallion was in the far corral, alone, the way they always kept him. Verena heard him before she saw him, the heavy, uneven drum of a big horse pacing a fence line. He had walked into a rut, and a sound under it she knew at once, and that the men out here had plainly never learned to read, not rage, but something closer to grief. The long, low note a horse makes when it has decided the world is a thing that hurts and has stopped expecting otherwise. She went out before supper, without asking permission, because asking would have meant a no, and she stood 20 feet off from the rails with her hands folded in front of her, and she looked at him. He was magnificent. There was no other word, and she did not reach for a smaller one. 16 hands if he was an inch, black as a whetstone, a deep chest and a clean, long throat latch, and a head she would have known anywhere, because she had been reading about that head for 2 weeks at a borrowed table. This was Midnight's errand by the Ostendorf import out of a mare called Gretel, and that bloodline did not make rogues. It made horses too smart for the men who bought them. Her father had a note about the line in the ledger, 3 pages from the back, in ink gone brown. Ostendorf blood. Never beat it. It remembers longer than you do. "There you are," she said to the horse in Dutch, low, not meaning anything by the words, only letting him hear that a voice could come at him without a rope behind it. The stallion stopped pacing. He swung his great head toward her and pinned his ears and showed her the white rims of his eyes. And a horse like that, a horse that had crippled 2 men and killed a third, would have sent any sensible person back over the fence. Verena did not move. She did not look at him straight on, which a horse reads as a hunt. She turned her body a quarter away, soft in the shoulders, and she breathed out slow so he could see her sides fall, and she kept her hands where he could see them, and empty. "I'm not going to do anything to you tonight," she told him. "I'm only going to stand here until you're bored of me. That's all. That's the whole of it." It took the better part of an hour. The light went from gold to amber to the long blue of a Montana dusk, and the stallion paced and stopped and pinned and paced, and twice he charged the rail and pulled up snorting, throwing dust, and Verena did not flinch and did not flee, and by the time the first star came out, he had stopped charging and stood at the far end of the corral with one hind foot cocked, watching her with his ears half forward and his weight settled back off his front feet, studying her the long careful while it takes an animal to set aside its own hard judgment and decide that this one quiet thing is not the same as all the other things that have come at it with ropes. She heard the boots behind her before the man cleared his throat. She knew it was the ranch hand they called Dewey, a long, lean fellow with a tobacco habit and a mouth, because she had felt him watching from the bunkhouse window the whole time. "You're either brave or you're stupid," Dewey said, "and I ain't decided which." "You don't have to decide tonight," Verena said without turning around. "Most things don't need deciding the first night." "That horse'll stomp you into the dirt," Dewey said. He'd done it to Clemens, stove his hip in. Clemens walks with a cane now, and he was the best hand in 3 counties. Clemens came at him with a rope and a war in his face, Verena said. She had not been there. She did not need to have been there. She had read enough margins in her father's hand to know exactly how a man like Clemens got stove in. I came at him with nothing. There's a difference. You and the boss both, Dewey said and spat. Big on differences. He shifted his weight against the rail, and she could hear him not leaving. What's that horse to you, anyhow? You been here half a day. He's the only thing on this place worth $300, Verena said, and right now he's worth nothing because everybody who looks at him sees a killer instead of a price. I see a price. Dewey was quiet a moment. Boss know you think that? Not yet. She turned her head a fraction, just enough. And I'd take it kindly, Mr. Dewey, if you let me be the one to tell him. A thing's heard different depending on whose mouth carries it. Just Dewey, he said, but there was something in it now that hadn't been there a minute ago. He stayed at the rail another minute, and she felt him looking at the horse, and then at her, and then at the horse again, doing some private arithmetic of his own, and then he went in to supper and left her there in the blue dark with the animal nobody could touch, the 2 of them standing 20 feet apart and neither one of them charging. That night she ate at the corner of Holt Bannister's table while the boy watched her from under his hair and said nothing. Holt said grace in 4 flat words and ate fast and did not look up. Verena had cooked because there was food in the house going soft and a cold stove was a waste, and she had made a thick stew with what she found and a pan of biscuits. And she watched the boy eat 3 of the biscuits and reach for a 4th, and then catch himself and draw the hand back and fold it in his lap. And her heart turned over once, quietly, the slow, hard turn it takes inside a person who has just watched a hungry child measure out his own portion in his own home and decide he has had enough. There's more, she said to him. There's plenty more. A boy your age should eat his fill and then some. Toby looked at his father. Holt did not look up from his plate. Eat, Holt said. And the boy took the biscuit, and that was the whole exchange. But Verena filed it away the way she filed everything, in the long ledger she kept in her head that no one ever thought to read. I went out to the Black Horse, she said. Now Holt looked up. You went in the corral? No, I stood outside it. I'll go in when he asks me to, and not before. He won't ask you to. Holt set down his fork. I'm going to say this once, and then it's said. That horse is the only thing on this place worth $1, and he's not worth that, because no man can ride him, and no man will buy him, knowing what he's done. I keep him because selling him for dog meat is the same as admitting the whole place is finished, and I'm not ready to admit that to the bank or to anybody else. You understand me? He is not a chore you're going to fix to make a point. You're a hand. Mend the fence on the south line tomorrow. Stay out of that corral. Verena considered him across the table. He was not a cruel man. She had braced for cruel and gotten something more tired and more dangerous, a man who had decided that hoping was a thing that cost too much. She knew that shape. She had spent 2 weeks reading about a horse who had decided the same thing. What's the date the bank wants its money? She asked. The question landed in the room like a dropped plate. Toby's head came up. Holt's hand went still on the table. That's not your concern, he said. It's exactly my concern, Verena said. if I'm going to live under this roof and watch it sold out from under all three of us. I'd rather know the size of the thing I'm fighting than be surprised by it." For a long moment she thought he would not answer. Then he said, very low, the way a man confesses a wound, "The 1st of November. $312 in the back interest, or they take the bottom land and the house with it." He pushed back from the table. "It's the 11th of August. You do your sum." 82 days. She did the sum where he could not see her do it, and she carried the number out of the room with her like a coal in her cupped hands, and she was careful with it because 82 days was not very many at all, and a horse that nobody could ride was worth a great deal of money, if a person could only get him gentle enough to prove what he was, and worth precisely nothing if she could not. She did not go in the corral the second day, or the third. She mended the south line fence, all of it in the heat, and Dewey watched her swing the maul and reset the posts, and he stopped saying she was stupid sometime around noon, and by evening he was handing her staples without being asked. She was strong. That was the thing they none of them expected and could not unsee once they had seen it. A big woman who has worked her whole life is not soft. She had set fence posts beside her father since she was 12, and her hands knew them all, and she drove a post deeper with 3 strokes than Dewey did with 6. And a man cannot watch that and go on believing what he believed at the gate. It was on the south line that she found the first thing. A post at the low corner, where the ground stayed damp, had rotted out at the base, and when she pulled it, the whole thing came up easy and brought a flat rusted tin with it, set down deep at the foot of the post and tamped over with care, hidden there by somebody who meant to walk back to this exact corner one day and dig it up again. She knocked the dirt off it and pried the lid, and inside, wrapped in oilcloth gone stiff, was a folded survey map and a few papers soft with damp, and a name written across the top in a careful Eastern hand that was not Holt's. Margaret Bannister. She stood there in the heat with it, reading enough to know it was the dead wife's, and a survey of the bottom land with figures on it, and she did not understand the whole of what she held, only that it mattered, and she wrapped it back in the oilcloth and carried it to her room and put it under the ledger, the two of them together, and she said nothing yet, because she did not understand it yet, and her father's rule was that you did not show a card you could not read. But every evening after the work she went and stood at the Black Horse's corral, and every evening she stood a foot closer than the night before, and she talked to him in her father's language about nothing at all, about the weather, about the price of oats, about a colt she had gentled in Pennsylvania who had bitten her exactly once and then never again. On the 4th evening she brought the ledger out with her and sat down on an upturned bucket against the rail and read aloud from it, not because the horse understood Dutch, but because a voice with no want in it, going on and on like creek water, is the most foreign and the most disarming thing in the world to an animal who has only ever heard voices that wanted something from him. "My father wrote this," she told the stallion, who stood 10 feet off now and listened with his ears swiveling. "He wrote down everything he ever learned, so I wouldn't have to learn it all the hard way like he did. There's a page in here about a horse like you. I've been saving it." She did not read him the page yet. She would know when. Her father had taught her that the work was mostly waiting, and the waiting was mostly trust. and trust was a thing you could not hurry any more than you could hurry bread, and that the men who failed with horses failed because they were always, always in a hurry, and the men who failed with everything else failed for the very same reason. On the 5th evening, Toby crept out to the bucket and sat in the dust beside her and listened to the strange, soft language go on and on. And when she stopped, he said, "What's it mean?" "What you're reading?" "Right now it means the price of oats in Rotterdam in 1860, Verena said. "It doesn't matter what it means. He's not listening to the words. He's listening to whether the voice wants anything from him. Yours doesn't either. That's why he lets you sit." Toby looked over at the black horse, who had drifted to within 8 feet of the rail and stood with his ears loose. "He's closer than Pa ever got him," the boy whispered. "That's because your Pa always came out here needing something from him," Verena said. "A horse can smell need like smoke. You and I don't need a thing off him tonight, so he can afford to come look." On the 7th evening, Holt came and stood at the rail beside her, which he had not done before. "You're still at this," he said. "I am." "He's quieter," Holt admitted. "It plainly cost him something to say it." "I've watched. He doesn't run the fence the way he did. He's not waiting for the fight the way he was." "No," Verena said. "He's not." They stood there a while in the gold light. The stallion came 2 steps closer, then stopped, then came one more, and stood there with his nostrils working, taking in the smell of the two of them, and then, and Verena heard Holt's breath catch, the black horse lowered his head and licked his lips and gave a great gusty sigh, the sigh a horse gives when it lets go of a thing it has been carrying, and the sound of it was so plainly relief that even a man who had decided hoping cost too much could not pretend he had not heard it. "What did you do to him?" Holt said. There was something raw in it now, under the gruff. "Nothing," Verena said. "That's the whole secret, Mr. Bannister, and it's the one thing none of you could do. I did nothing to him. Everybody who ever came near that horse came to do something to him. I'm the first one who came to do nothing, and a horse can tell the difference faster than any of you can. He's been waiting his whole life for somebody to stop wanting something from him long enough that he could afford to want something back." Holt was quiet a long time. "My wife used to talk like that," he said finally, and it surprised them both that he had said it, and he pushed off the rail and went toward the house before either of them could do anything with it. But at the porch he stopped, and without turning around he said, "There's interest due to a freight man in town day after tomorrow. I'll be gone over a night. The boy stays here." A pause. "Mind the boy." "I'll mind the boy," Verena said, and she watched the door close behind him, and she thought, 82 days, and now I'm down to 75, and the only asset on this place that could clear $312 is a horse that just sighed at me for the first time." She looked at the stallion. The stallion looked at her. "We don't have all the time in the world, you and I," she told him in Dutch, "but we have some. We'll have to be smart with it." The trouble arrived the next morning in a buggy in the person of a man named Cyrus Pruitt, who held the note on the Bannister place for the bank in Miles City, and who had a way of smiling that did not reach any other part of his face. Holt was gone to town. Pruitt knew Holt was gone to town. That was, of course, why he had come. "You'd be the new wife," Pruitt said, looking her over from the buggy seat without getting down. The same inventory all of them took, and Verena stood on the porch with the boy's hand finding the back of her skirt and gripping it, and she let Pruitt finish his looking before she answered. "I'd be Verena Voss," she said. "Mr. Bannister's in town." "I know exactly where Mr. Bannister is." Pruitt's smile widened a hair. "I'll be plain with you, Mrs. Voss, was it? The kindest thing anyone could do for Holt Bannister is help him see this place is lost. 400 acres is a great deal of dirt for a man to drown in. He's 3 payments behind. November the 1st, the bank takes it, and there's a buyer already standing by who'll pay enough that Holt walks away with something instead of nothing." The smile. "A man in your husband's position should be grateful for a clean ending. You might tell him so. A wife's word carries." "And who's the buyer?" Verena said, standing by so kindly. "That's the bank's affair." "Is it a man named Voss?" Verena said, and she watched it land, watched the smile go fixed and false on Pruitt's face for 1/2 of 1 second before he smoothed it, and she had her answer, and her stomach went cold and certain in the way a thing goes cold when you have finally seen the whole of a shape you only knew the edges of. Her uncle. Her uncle was the buyer standing by. Her uncle had not sent her here to fail by accident. He had sent her here to fail on a schedule, on a date, the 1st of November, so that he could buy the bottom land for a song, and she was meant to be the weight that finished the man, the last small cruelty that broke Holt Bannister's back so the rest of the plan could roll downhill clean. She had been sent here as a tool, and the tool had a name, and the name was hers. "I think you should drive on, Mr. Pruitt," Verena said very evenly, "and I think you can tell the buyer standing by that the Bannister place is not for sale at any song, and that the woman who told you so reads bloodlines for a living and is very, very good at telling a sound animal from a broken one. He'll know what I mean." Pruitt looked at her for a long moment, and something moved behind his eyes that had not been there before, a recalculation, the look of a man who came expecting to find a frightened fat bride and found instead a problem he had not budgeted for. But before he picked up the reins, he sat back in the buggy seat and tried one more thing, because a man of his stripe always keeps one more card tucked under his hand and never rides off until he has played it. "You ought to know," he said easy, "that the land's surveyed against the bank's books, and the survey's on file in Miles City, and there's nothing in it that helps you. Whatever you think you've found, whatever a country wife thinks she understands about a deed, it's been looked at by men whose business it is. Don't go spending Holt Bannister's last hope on a hope of your own." He touched his hat. "Good day." It was a strange thing to say, and she heard it for what it was. A man telling her not to look in a place precisely because he was afraid of what was there. He turned the buggy and went, and Verena stood on the porch with the boy gripping her skirt and watched the dust of him until it was gone. And she thought about the rusted tin and the dead wife's survey under the ledger in the back room, and she thought, "He told me there's a survey on file. He did not tell me there might be more than one." "Is he a bad man?" Toby asked. "He's a careful one," Verena said, "which can be worse." She put her hand on the boy's head. "Don't you worry about Mr. Pruitt. You and I have work to do. How would you like to help me with a horse?" The boy's face did a complicated thing. "Pa says I'm not allowed near the black horse." "You're not, and you won't be. Not until I say, but there's more to a horse than the dangerous end of him, and you can help me from outside the rails. Would you like that?" The gray eyes came up and looked at her, the dead woman's eyes in the living boy's face, and Verena saw the loneliness in them, plain and unhidden, sitting right there at the surface where a clear creek shows you every stone on its bed all the way down, and she understood that this child had been rationing more than biscuits. "Yeah," Toby said, "I'd like that." So the boy became her hands and her runner and her second pair of eyes. He fetched the soft brush and the body cloth. He sat on the bucket when she could not, and read the weather, and told her when a thunderhead was building over the crazies so they could get the work done before the air turned the horse jumpy. And slowly, slowly, over the days that the falling number of them allowed her, she went into the corral. The first time, she only stood inside the gate and let the stallion decide what to do about a person on his side of the rail, and he came and smelled her all over, her hair and her hands and the hem of her blue dress, his breath huge and warm, and then he walked away and pretended to graze, which her father's ledger called the great compliment, the moment a horse decides you are not worth watching, which is the moment he has decided you are safe. The second time she touched his shoulder once and took her hand away before he could ask her to. The third time she ran a soft cloth down his neck while Toby narrated everything happening behind her so she would never be surprised, and the black horse stood for it and trembled and stood for it, and when she stepped back he turned and pressed his great forehead against her chest, hard, the whole weight of his huge skull, and stood there leaning on her like a tired child, and Verena had to set her feet to hold him, and she stood with her arms around the head of a horse that had killed a man, and she breathed and did not move and did not cry. Though it was a near thing, that time, it was a very near thing. "He liked you," Toby whispered from the rail, awed. "He trusts me," Verena said, "which is more and harder, and worth a great deal more than liking." She rubbed the warm hollow above the horse's eye with her thumb. "Liking comes easy and goes easy. Trust is the thing you build a life on." It was while she had her hand on his neck the fourth time that she found the second thing, and it was on the horse himself. Running the cloth down under the heavy black mane, her fingers caught a hard ridge of old scar she had not felt before, a band of it, circling low on the throat, the kind of scar a rope leaves when a horse has fought it long and hard at the end of a snubbing post. But under the mane, on the near side, set into the hide where a brand goes, was a second mark, small and clean and deliberate, not the Bannister brand at all. It was a little running M, a registered stock mark, the kind a careful breeding farm back east, burned small and high where it won't spoil a sale. She stood very still and traced it with her thumb. A running M. Margaret's mark. This was not Holt's horse by the breeding any more than the survey was Holt's by the hand. This horse had come to the marriage the same way the bottom land had, and somebody had taken pains, 2 years ago, to forget that. "What are you looking at?" Toby asked. "An old brand," Verena said. "Toby, what was your mother's name? Her whole name, before she married your pa?" The boy thought. "Margaret. Pa called her Greta. Her people back east called her Greta, too, in the letters." He scuffed the dirt. "There used to be letters. In a box. Pa put them away." "Did he?" said Verena softly, and rubbed the running M one more time, and said nothing else, but she carried the brand out of the corral with her the same way she carried the survey, in the room in her head where she kept the things she could not yet read all the way down. She named the horse Errand for the bloodline, because a horse that goes that long without a name forgets he is anybody at all. When Holt came back from town 2 days later, dust gray and tired, with the freight man paid and the rest of the world no kinder than he had left it, Verena was in the corral with a lead rope clipped to a halter on the black horse's head, walking him in a slow circle, and Holt stopped his own horse in the yard and sat there and did not breathe for what felt to her like a full minute. "Verena," he said, just her name. It was the first time he had used it. "Don't come to the rail fast," she said, calm, not stopping her circle. "Come slow or don't come." He got down slow. He came to the rail slow. He watched a woman he had insulted at his own gate lead the horse that had crippled 2 of his men and killed a 3rd around a quiet circle in the gold evening light. And the horse's head was low and his ears were soft, and he was by every visible sign a different animal than the one Holt Bannister had owned for 2 years and feared the whole time. "How?" Holt said. It was all he had. "Time," Verena said, "and nothing. And my father, mostly." She stopped Errand at the rail, a respectful arm's length from Holt, and let the horse look at the man and the man look at the horse. "He's not gentled all the way. Don't get ideas. He'll take a saddle from me by month's end if nothing scares him backward, and a rider after that, and he is, Mr. Bannister, going to be worth more money than anything on this place, because a sound stud out of the Ostendorf line, who handles like a lamb, is worth $200 to the right breeder, and there are right breeders in Helena and Bozeman, both who'd come look at him." She let the number sit in the air. $200 against 312 owed. It was not the whole of it, but it was most of the way, and it was the first time in 2 years that anyone had stood in this yard and named a way out instead of a way down. Holt put his hand out, slow, and the black horse stretched his neck and lipped at the man's palm, gentle as anything. And Verena watched a thing happen on Holt Bannister's face that she had not seen there before, and that he could not have hidden if he had tried, which was hope, plain and undefended and a little bit terrible, the hope of a man who had sworn it off and gotten ambushed by it at his own corral. "My God," he said soft. "He's just a horse who got tired of being afraid," Verena said. "I know the feeling. So do you, if you'd own it." Holt took his hand back and looked at her over the rail, the dust on him and the long road in him, and he said, "I owe you an apology for the gate, for what I said when you got down." "You do," Verena agreed, because she was not a woman who would tell a man his debt was nothing when it was something, and a thing forgiven too easy is never really learned. "But I'll take it in installments, the same as the bank. Pay it down by treating me like a hand who knows her business, and we'll call it square by November." He almost smiled. She watched it nearly happen and not quite, and it was a near thing, the same as her not crying had been a near thing, and she thought, there are 2 animals on this place who have decided that hoping costs too much, and I have gentled one of them, and the other is going to be a great deal more work. That night, while Holt washed the road off in the basin by the back door, Verena set the dead wife's survey on the table in front of him without a word, the rusted tin and all, and stepped back against the wall and folded her hands and let him come to it on his own, in his own time, the slow way you give a wary animal room to walk up to a strange thing and smell it out for himself instead of forcing it on him. He went still over the basin, the water dripped off his jaw. "Where?" he said. "Buried at the foot of a rotted post on the south line. Under the corner where the ground stays wet. I pulled the post and it came up with it. It's hers, Holt." Her hands all over it. I didn't read past the name and the survey numbers because it wasn't mine to read all the way down. She paused. "Pruitt came while you were gone. He told me not to go looking at the survey on file in Miles City. A man doesn't warn you off a thing unless he's scared of it." Holt picked up the map and unfolded it slow, his wet hands leaving dark prints on the soft paper, and he looked at it a long time, and his face did something she could not name. "Greta surveyed the bottom land herself," he said finally, low. "Her people sent a man out the year we married. I never knew why she made such a business of it. I thought it was her Eastern fussiness." He set it down. "I haven't been able to go through her things. 2 years. I bolt that box of letters shut every time I get near it." "You don't have to tonight," Verena said. "But that box may be worth more than the horse, Holt. I don't know yet how. I only know that careful people leave careful papers, and your wife was a careful person, and a careful person who surveys her own land in her own name is telling you something across 2 years if you'll only sit down and let her." He looked at her, the lamp between them. "You don't miss much. My father raised me to read what a thing is, not what I'm told it is," she said. "It's the only trade I have. I'm trying to spend it on you." The town found out the way towns do. Dewey told it in the saloon, half boast and half wonder, that the boss's fat bride had haltered the killer black and led him round like a milk cow, and the town did with it what towns do with anything that does not fit the size of their imagination, which is to bet against it. There was a man named Royce Tillman who ran the biggest spread in the valley and had wanted the Bannister bottom land for years and had been waiting, patient as a buzzard, for the bank to do his shopping for him. There was a feed store crowd who had laughed at Holt for keeping the dangerous horse, and now had to find something new to laugh at. And there was Cyrus Pruitt, who had driven back to Miles City with a problem in his ledger he had not been able to make balance, and who had written, in his careful clerk's hand, a letter to a man named Peter Voss, informing him that the situation at the Bannister place had developed in a manner the bank had not foreseen, and that the bride was not behaving as represented. So the mockery came, the way it always comes in this kind of story, and Verena had known it would and had braced for it. It came on a Saturday, when she drove the wagon into town with Toby for flour and nails and the small comforts a house needs, and 3 men outside the feed store turned to watch the wagon come, and one of them, a thick, red-faced fellow named Asa Bell, who hauled freight and considered himself a wit, said it loud enough to carry. "There she is, Bannister's prize heifer. Here she's better with the stock than the husband." The laugh went around. "Reckon it takes one to know one. They're feeding her at the trough out there or in the house." Verena pulled the wagon up easy and set the brake, and she did not hurry, and she did not color, and she felt Toby go rigid beside her, his small hands fisting, and she put her own hand flat on his knee. Once, be still, before she turned on the wagon seat and looked down at Asa Bell from the height the seat gave her. "Mr. Bell," she said, pleasant as church, "I hear you haul freight." "What of it?" Asa said, grinning around at his friends, certain he had won. "I hear you broke an axle on the Lewistown road in July, hauling a load you'd loaded wrong, and lost a day and a half and a quarter of the goods to the creek when she went over." She had heard no such thing. She had heard nothing at all about Isabel until 30 seconds ago, but she had read men her whole life the same way she read horses, and she knew the breed of a loud one, and she knew that a man who hauls freight and brags in front of a store has cracked an axle through his own carelessness at least once and is ashamed of it. And she watched the grin fall right off Isabel's face and knew she had thrown her loop true. "That's who told you?" "Nobody had to tell me," Verena said. "I read loads the way I read horses. I can tell a thing that's been put together right from a thing that's going to come apart on the road just by the set of it. And, Mr. Bell, you have the set of a man who comes apart on the road." She gathered the reins. "I'd watch my second axle if I were you, and I'd watch my mouth in front of a child, but I expect that one's past mending." She clucked to the team and drove on, leaving Isabel red and silent, and his friends laughing now at him instead, and Toby beside her was looking up at her with his whole face open like a window. "You don't really know about his axle," Toby breathed. "I know about men like him," Verena said, "which is most of what you need to know about any particular one of them. Don't ever let a loud man see you flinch, Toby. A loud man is loud because he's scared of the quiet. Give him quiet and he'll trip over it every time." She glanced down at the boy. "But don't you go borrowing my fights. You've got your own coming, and a man should spend his courage on his own." Their next stop was the land office, a thing she had decided on before she ever left the ranch, and she left Toby holding the team and went in alone. The clerk was a young man with ink on his cuff and a window full of afternoon light, and she asked, plain, to see the recorded survey and the deed on the Bannister Bottom land, and the clerk pulled the books down and laid them open, and Verena stood at the counter and read with her finger, slow, the way she read a bloodline, and she found the thing she had half known she would find since she pulled the post on the south line. The bottom land, the creek section, the best of it, was not recorded against Holt Bannister at all. It was recorded against Margaret Bannister as her separate property brought to the marriage, and the survey on file was Greta's own survey, the twin of the one in the rusted tin. "Is this the only survey of record?" Verena asked. "There's a bank survey filed in Miles City that runs the lines a little different," the clerk said, turning a page. "Came in last spring. But this one's the original, ma'am, and it's the one that holds. The original always holds. Whoever filed the new one was either careless or hopeful." He looked up at her. "You kin to the Bannisters?" "I'm Mrs. Bannister," Verena said, and it was the first time she had said it, and she found she did not mind the sound of it. "Or I will be. Thank you. You've been more help than you know." And she paid for a clean copy of both the survey and the deed page, and she folded them small, and she carried them out to the wagon, and she said nothing to Toby, but she sat a moment with her hands on the reins before she drove on, because she had just understood the shape of the whole thing all the way down, and it was bigger than a horse and bigger than a marriage, and it changed everything she would have to do between now and the 1st of November. That evening, when she told the day to the black horse in Dutch, while she brushed the dust of it out of his coat, she did not tell him the part about Isabel, because the horse did not need her small triumphs, and because she found, brushing the long, warm slope of his shoulder in the gold light, that she did not need them either, the way she once might have. There was a thing happening to Verena Voss on this hard, failing, beautiful place that she had not let herself expect, and it had nothing to do with winning an argument outside a feed store. It had to do with a boy who saved her the fourth biscuit now without being told, and a man who said her name instead of looking at her waistline, and a horse who pressed his forehead to her chest at the end of the day as if she were the only safe thing in a world full of ropes. She had come here to be a tool in someone else's failure. She was becoming, instead, the load-bearing post of the whole place, and the strangest part was that nobody had to give her the position. She had simply done the work until the work made her indispensable, which is the only kind of belonging that no one can ever take back from you. August went out hot, and September came in with a different light, lower and more golden, and the falling number went with it. 70 days, then 60, then 50, and the work went on. Aaron took the saddle blanket, then the saddle, then her weight across his back in the round corral, all in the careful order her father's ledger prescribed. And the day she sat fully up on him for the first time, and he stood under her quiet as a church, and then walked off at her ask, soft and willing, she heard Dewey at the rail make a sound she had never heard a grown man make, half a laugh and half something else. And she looked over, and the lean, tobacco-chewing hand had his hat off his head and pressed to his chest, like he was at a funeral or a wedding and could not tell which. "I'll be," Dewey said. "I'll just be." "You'll just be," Verena agreed, walking the black horse past him, and Dewey put his hat back on and looked at her differently from that day, and he was the first of the men to eat his words, and he ate them clean, which she respected. "Mrs. Voss," he said to her after formal, "if you ever need a thing on this place lifted or hauled or held, you ask me first and the others second, and don't you let nobody talk to you in town the way they done. I heard about Asa Bell, whole valley heard about Asa Bell." He chewed. "It was the best thing I heard all summer." It was Dewey, too, who brought her the third thing, a few evenings later, sidling up to the corral with his hat already in his hands the way he held it now around her. "I've been turning something over," he said, "about the horse, about Clemens." He spat, careful, away from her. "Folks tell it that the black throwed Clemens and stove his hip. And he did, but it weren't all the horse's doing, and I've been the only one knew it, and I held my tongue 2 years on account of I needed the work." He looked at the ground. "Clemens was drunk. He come at that horse with a rope and a quirt both, on a bet, to break him in a morning so Tillman'd hire him away. Royce Tillman put him up to it, paid him to come gentle the horse fast so Tillman could buy him cheap after, if the boss got desperate. It was Tillman's doing that whole bad morning, and the man that died, that was a drifter Tillman sent the next spring, same play, same rope, same bet. That horse never killed nobody that wasn't sent to hurt him first." Verena stood very still. "You'd say that, if it came to it, in front of people." "I'd say it," Dewey said. "I'm done being a man who holds his tongue for the work. You cured me of it. You and a horse." He put his hat back on. "Royce Tillman wants this bottom land bad enough to lame a man for it. You ought to know the size of what circling is all." "I'm learning the size of it," Verena said quietly, and she added Dewey's words to the room in her head, with the survey and the brand and the rusted tin, and the shape of the thing got bigger again, and clearer and uglier. Holt was at the supper table more now, and he ate slower, and he looked up, and one evening He asked Toby about his day and listened to the answer, and Verena, ladling stew, watched the boy light up at the simple fact of his father's attention and had to turn to the stove for a moment so neither of them would see her face. Another evening, Holt brought down the box of his dead wife's letters, the one he had bolted shut from himself for 2 years, and he set it on the table and sat in front of it a long time. And then he said, "Sit with me. I can't read these alone, and I won't read them without you, because you're the one who said she'd been talking to me across 2 years, and I was too proud to listen." So they read them together by lamplight, Verena and Holt, the dead woman's letters from her people back east, and the careful Eastern hand laid out a careful Eastern truth, page by page, that Greta's people had not trusted the frontier and had recorded everything in her name on purpose, that the bottom land and the bloodstock were hers, kept separate, deliberately, against exactly the kind of bad luck that had come. And in the last letter she ever wrote home, never sent, found folded in the bottom of the box, that she meant to make a will, and feared she had waited too long, and that, whatever happened, Holt was not to let her boy be turned out of land that was the boy's by right. Holt put the letter down and pressed the heel of his hand to his eyes and did not pretend it was dust. And Verena sat with him in the lamplight and did not say a word, because there was nothing to say that would not be too much, and some grief you can only keep a person company inside of. "She knew," Holt said, hoarse. "She knew she might die, and she set it up so the boy couldn't be robbed. And I bolted the box shut and near let him be robbed anyway out of my own grieving." "You didn't, though," Verena said. "It's not the 1st of November yet. She left the path. We've only got to walk it." She reached across and, for the first time, put her hand over his on the table, plain, the way you'd steady anyone. "And we will." This is the part she could feel coming and could not have named if you had asked her to. She was careful not to name it, even to herself, because naming a thing too soon is the surest way to scare it off, the same with men as with horses. But she knew the shape of it. She knew it the night Holt walked out to the corral where she was reading aloud to Errand from the ledger, and stood in the dark just outside the lantern light and listened to her read her dead father's words in a language he could not understand. And when she finished and looked up, he was wiping his eyes with the heel of his hand and pretending it was the dust. "What's it say?" he asked. "The part you just read." She looked down at the page. It was the page she had been saving, the one about the horse like Aaron, and she had read it tonight, because she had felt, finally, that the time had come. "It says," she translated slow, "that the horses everyone gives up on are not broken. They're the smart ones. They've only learned that the world is a thing that hurts, and they've made the sensible decision to stop hoping otherwise, and that you cannot argue a smart horse out of a true thing he has learned." She turned the worn page under her thumb. "You can only build him a small new world, one day at a time, where the true thing isn't true anymore, and then wait. And the waiting is the whole of it, and the waiting is the hardest thing a person can do, because every day you want to hurry it, and every day you hurry it, you start over." Holt was quiet for a long moment, there in the dark outside the lantern light. "Your father wrote that about horses," he said. "He wrote it about horses." Verena closed the ledger. "He wasn't only writing about horses, though. He never was. I just took 20 years to understand that." Holt came into the lantern light then and stood close, and looked at her in a way that had nothing to do with the gate, nothing to do with her waistline, nothing to do with any inventory anyone had ever taken of her, and he reached out and put his rough hand over the worn leather cover of the ledger where her own hand rested on it. Not on her hand, but near it, near enough that she could feel the warmth come off his skin. "I've been a smart horse," Holt said low. 2 years, stopped hoping, made the sensible decision. His thumb moved once against the leather. "You've been building me a small new world all this time, and I've been too proud to see it for what it was." "I know," Verena said. Her voice was not as steady as she would have liked. "I've been waiting. The waiting's the whole of it." He did not kiss her. It was not that kind of moment yet, and they both knew it. There was a wall of debt and a date and a hostile world standing between this and anything spoken plain. But he stood there in the lantern light with his hand near hers on her dead father's book, the two of them, and the warm breathing dark of the horse beyond, and something passed between them that did not need a name and would not have survived one. Then he took his hand back, gentle, and said, 41 days, because he, too, it turned out, had been keeping the count, carrying it like a coal in his cupped hands all this time, the same as she had, and we've got $200 on the hoof if a breeder comes, and $112 of nothing to find after that, and Tillman circling, and Pruitt circling, and I've never in my life been gladder to be in a fight I might actually have a chance of winning." "We," Verena said. "You said we." Holt looked at her. "I did," he said. "I meant it." And he went in, and she sat a while longer with the horse, and she did not let herself smile until she heard the house door close, and then she smiled alone in the dark, the wide, foolish, helpless smile of a woman who had stopped expecting a particular thing a long time ago and had just felt it arrive anyway. The breeder came on a Tuesday in the second week of October, a careful Helena man named Sorensen, with a gold watch chain and a sharp eye, and Verena saddled the black horse herself and rode him for the man, walk and trot and a clean, easy lope around the big corral, and stopped him square in front of Sorensen and stepped down, and the Helena man walked all the way around Aaron twice without saying anything, and then put his hand on the horse's neck, and the horse let him, and Sorensen turned to Holt and said, "I was told this animal killed a man." "He did," Holt said. "Before she had him?" Sorensen looked at Verena. The same inventory. She watched him take it, the size of her, the blue dress, the work-worn hands, and she watched the inventory change in his eyes the way it had changed in Dewey's, because he had just watched her ride. He lifted the heavy mane on the near side with 2 practiced fingers and turned the hide toward the light to read what was under it, and his thumb found the small running M, and he went very still. "That's a Calder mark," Sorensen said slowly. "A running M. The Calder farm in Maryland. I bought a filly off them in '78. He looked up at Holt. "This horse was bred by the Calders. How'd you come by a Calder horse out here?" "My wife was a Calder," Holt said, and Verena watched him say it and watched something settle in him as he said it, a thing claimed at last. "Margaretta Calder. The horse came with her, same as the land." Sorensen's eyebrows went up, and the whole shape of the deal changed in front of them, because a black stud out of the Ostendorf line with a Calder mark and papers to prove it was not a $200 horse to a Helena breeder who knew the Calder name. 200, Sorensen said, was what I came prepared to say to a killer of unknown breeding. A Calder-bred Ostendorf stud that handles like this, I'll say 300, and count myself lucky if his papers are what that mark says they are. His papers are exactly what that mark says, Verena said, and her heart was going hard because $300 against 312 owed was almost the whole of it, almost the whole climb in one breath. And I'll have the registration here for you to read with your own eyes before you put down a dime. And here was the moment her 2 weeks at a borrowed table paid off in full, because she had not only studied the horse, she had written away in August for the registry papers, knowing she would need them, and they had come back not 3 days ago, and she had read them by lamplight and gone very still and very cold, because the papers told a story nobody on this ranch knew. She did not tell it yet. She fetched the papers and laid them in Sorensen's hands and let him read the breeding, and the deal was struck, $300, with 30 down to hold him and the rest on delivery to Helena. Come the first week of November, and Sorensen drove off satisfied, and Holt stood in the yard with $30 in gold in his hand, looking like a man who had found water in a desert. But Verena was not looking at the gold. She was looking at the registration papers, which Sorensen had handed back, and at the line near the bottom that she had read by lamplight 3 nights ago and not been able to make herself believe. Because the horse had been registered 2 years past, not in the name of Holt Bannister. He had been registered in the name of Margaret Bannister, Margaret Calder Bannister, Holt's dead wife. The horse was hers. The bloodstock had come to the marriage as her property from her people back east, and had been recorded as her separate property in a registry, and Verena had checked. She had read it at the land office in town with her own finger, the deed page and the survey both, in the deed book as well. Margaret Bannister had brought money to the marriage, more money than Holt had ever had, and she had been a careful woman, and her people had been careful people, and they had recorded her bottom land purchase and her bloodstock as hers, separate in her own name, the way careful Eastern people did. And Margaret had died without a will, intestate, leaving a husband and a minor son, and under the law of the territory, her separate property did not simply fall to her husband to lose to the bank. A share of it, a controlling share of it, with the boy a minor and the mother's Calder people willing to assert it, passed to the child, to Toby. The bottom land was not Holt's to lose, not all of it. The most valuable part of it, the part with the creek that never ran dry, the part Peter Voss and Royce Tillman and Cyrus Pruitt were all so patiently circling, that part belonged in law to a 9-year-old boy, held for him until his majority, and could not be sold out from under him to satisfy his father's debts without a court and a guardian and a fight nobody had ever picked, because nobody had ever read the papers, because Holt had been too proud and too grieved to go through his dead wife's things, and Pruitt had been too eager to foreclose on what he assumed, and Peter Voss had done his sum on bad information from 1,000 miles away. Verena stood in the yard with the registration papers in her hand and the gold gleaming in Holt's, and she understood that she was holding the whole thing, the entire weight of it, and that it was hers to set down carefully or to drop. And she thought about the boy who saved her the 4th biscuit, and the man who had said "we" and meant it, and the horse who pressed his forehead to her chest, and she folded the papers and put them in her apron and said nothing yet about the law of it, because the time was not yet. and her father's ledger said the waiting was the whole of it, and she had not waited this long to hurry now. She wrote one letter that night, by lamplight, in her careful hand, to a lawyer in Bozeman, whose name the young clerk at the land office had given her. She told Holt this much, because they were past the keeping of things from each other now, and she showed him the letter before she sealed it, and he read it slow and set it down and put his hand flat on the table beside it. "You're spending our one good chance on a lawyer in Bozeman," he said, not angry, just laying it out the way she had taught him. "I'm spending it on the only chance that doesn't end with us losing the bottom land, even if we pay the note," Verena said. "Holt, hear me. We can pay the bank its $312 with the horse money, and we can still lose the creek, because the moment we're clear of the bank, Tillman buys the note's shadow or finds another way, and your boy's land has no protector but you, and you and I both know how a court treats a grieving rancher against a man like Royce Tillman with money and friends. But a court treats a dead mother's recorded wish for her orphaned son very differently. The boy's claim isn't a thing we wave to scare them. It's a wall. It's a wall nobody in this valley can climb, and I mean to build it before the 1st of November, so that when they come, and they will come, they break on it." She sealed the letter. "Trust me the way the horse does. Let me do nothing to them but be standing in the right place at the right time with the right paper in my hand." Holt looked at her a long moment. "All right," he said. "I trust you." And it cost him. She could see it cost him to hand a woman the one good chance and stand back. And it was the largest thing he had given her yet, larger than the apology, larger than we. She rode to town herself in the cold morning to post it, and she paid for it to go fast. And she came home and gentled her horse and ladled her stew and waited, with 30 days left on the falling count, for the answer and for the storm she could feel building over all of them the way Toby could feel a thunderhead building over the crazies. The storm came early, and it came as fire. It was the 18th of October, a dry, cold afternoon with a hard wind out of the southwest, and Verena was at the corral, and Holt was on the south line, and Toby was carrying water from the creek when she smelled it. The smell every soul on the high plains is born afraid of, and she turned and saw the brown smudge low on the horizon to the west, and the wind driving it, and she knew in one breath what it was and what it meant. Prairie fire, wind-driven, fast as a horse can run, and the whole of the Bannister herd was on the west pasture in its path, every head of cattle the place owned, the cattle that were the difference between Holt walking away from the auction with something and walking away with nothing, the cattle that even the horse money could not replace. The men came at a dead run from every direction, Holt and Dewey, and the other hand, a kid named Pruitt, no relation to the banker, and they were saddling and shouting, and the fire was coming faster than they could think, and Verena did the sum the way she always did the sum, fast and cold. The herd was bunched at the west fence, panicking, milling against the wire with the smoke rolling toward them, and to turn them, to drive a panicked herd away from a fire and toward the creek and the safety of the wet bottom, a rider had to get out and around the leading edge of them, between the cattle and the flames, on a horse fast enough and brave enough and trusting enough to run straight at the thing every animal instinct screamed to run from. Holt's saddle horse was already shying and rolling its eyes at the smoke. Dewey's the same. The fire would have them all in 20 minutes, and the only horse on the place with the speed and the heart and the wind to do it stood in the corral behind her, and the only person on the place that horse would carry into fire was Verena Voss. "Verena, no," Holt said when he saw her swing the gate. His face was white under the dust. "No, not into that. The herd's not worth your life. Nothing's worth—" "It's not just the herd, Holt." She had Aaron's bridle on already. She had been moving while she thought. "It's the herd and the auction and the boy's whole future and yours and mine, and I am the only one who can turn them, and you know it, and standing here arguing is costing us the seconds I need." She got a hand in the black mane and went up onto him bareback, because there was no time for a saddle, hauling her own weight up by main strength, and Aaron stood for it, stood rock steady with the smoke in his nostrils, because she had built him a small new world over 75 days where her hand on his neck meant the true thing he had learned about fear was not true anymore. "Open the bottom gate in the creek lane and get out of my way. And Holt," she looked down at him once, "mind the boy." She put her heels to the black horse, and he went. He went like nothing she had ever ridden, like the wind had got under him, his great body gathering and pouring out beneath her, and the smoke came up to meet them, and the heat came off the world like an open oven door. And Verena lay low on his neck and asked him for everything, and he gave it, straight toward the fire, out along the leading edge of the panicked herd, between the bawling wall of cattle and the orange wall of the flames. The smoke tore at her eyes and her lungs, and she could not see, and she did not need to see. She could feel the herd off her left knee like a living tide, and she drove the black horse up the length of it at a flat, dead run, putting herself and the horse and her voice between the cattle and their terror, turning the leaders by her own body the way her father had taught her to turn anything that had decided to bolt, not by fighting it, but by giving it a truer thing to run toward. "Haw!" she screamed at the lead cows and swung her hat, and the great black horse cut in toward them fearless, his shoulder swinging the leaders off the fence, and the herd, finding suddenly that the wall of their panic had a gap in it and a direction away from the heat, broke and ran for the creek lane Holt had thrown open, the whole bawling mass of them turning like water, finding a channel, pouring down toward the wet bottom and the safe green dark of the creek timber, and Verena drove the black horse along the flank of the running herd, turning the stragglers, gathering the slow, her face black with smoke, and her lungs full of fire, and her hands twisted in the mane. It was near the back of the running herd, where the smoke was thickest, that she nearly lost everything. A calf had gone down in a wash, and a young cow stood over it, bawling, planted, refusing the lane, and behind her 3 more had balled up against the fence in their panic with the fire 40 yards off and closing. Verena wheeled the black horse and drove him into the gap and leaned down off his side, low, hanging by one fist in the mane, the way her father had taught her, and got her arm under the dropped calf and heaved it up across the horse's withers, and the cow followed her calf as a cow always will, and the balled-up 3 followed the cow, and the whole stuck knot of them came loose all at once and ran, and Verena hauled herself back upright with the calf across the horse, and the flame so close now she could feel them curling the loose hair at her temple, and she gave Aaron his head, and he carried her and the calf out of it at a dead run, the last of the herd streaming down the creek lane ahead of them, and behind her the prairie went up where they had stood not a half a minute before, the flames roaring through the dry grass with a sound like the end of the world. She brought the last of them down into the creek, and rode the black horse belly deep into the cold running water and set the calf down on its feet in the shallows where its mother found it, and turned and looked back, and the whole west pasture was a sheet of fire, and there was not one head of cattle left in it, because every single one of them was standing in the creek around her, soot-streaked and bawling and alive, and the men were coming down the bottom on their shying horses with their mouths open, and Holt Bannister rode his frightened horse straight into the creek to her and took her smoke-blackened face in both his hands, right there, in front of every one of them, in the water, with the fire roaring behind, and he said, "I thought I'd lost you, I thought I'd lost you, don't you ever," and could not finish it. And Verena, who did not cry, who had not cried at the gate, or at the insult, or at any of it, put her own black hand over his, and finally let herself. The fire burned the west pasture and stopped at the creek, the way prairie fires do, and the rain that the wind had been promising all day finally came at dusk and finished it. And in the morning the world was wet and black and steaming, and every head of cattle was alive, and the black horse stood in the corral cropping wet grass as if he had not the day before run through fire to save a ranch. And Verena slept 11 hours and woke up sore in every fiber and could not stop a foolish smile when she remembered Holt's hands on her face in the creek. But in the wet black morning, walking the burned west pasture to count the cost, Holt found a thing in the char that turned the day cold again. At the far west corner, where the fire had started, in the lee of a rock, where the wind would have carried no spark, lay a coal-oil tin, empty, and a scatter of burned matchsticks, and the grass around the rock laid down in a track where a man had walked in and walked out. Holt stood over it a long time, then picked up the tin and carried it back to the house and set it on the table next to the dead wife's survey, 2 pieces of evidence keeping company, and said, very quiet, "This fire didn't start itself. The wind was out of the southwest. This corner's the one place a southwest wind would carry the flame straight across the whole west pasture and never touch the house. Somebody who knew this land said it, and said it to take the herd and leave us nothing to bring to auction but bare dirt and a note we couldn't pay." "Tillman," Verena said. It was not a question. "Tillman pays men to do his bad mornings," Dewey said from the doorway, where he had come in unasked, and he stood looking down at the coal-oil tin with his jaw set and a slow, grim nod working in him, a man staring at the hard proof of a thing he had carried as suspicion for 2 long years. "I told you the size of what's circling." He looked at Holt. "Boss, I'll ride to the sheriff at Big Timber and carry that tin, and I'll tell what I know about Clemens and the drifter both while I'm at it, and let Royce Tillman explain his bad mornings to the law for once instead of to a horse." Holt looked at Verena. Verena looked at the tin and at the survey beside it, and she felt all the separate pieces in the room in her head turn at once and lock together into a single hard shape. "Yes," she said, "send Dewey. Let the law have the fire. But the fire's only the loud half of it, and Tillman's only the loud man. The quiet half is the bank and my uncle and the note, and that half we win in Bozeman with the boys' paper on the 1st of November, and not before." She put her hand on the survey. "Let them think the fire worked. Let them think we're finished and bare. They'll come on the 1st to gather up what they think is broken, and we'll be standing on a wall they didn't know was there." The valley heard about the ride through the fire, too. The valley heard about all of it. Dewey told it in town, and Pruitt the hand told it, and the men who had been on the bottom told it. and the story of the fat bride who rode the killer horse through a prairie fire and turned the herd and saved the Bannister place went up and down the valley faster than the fire had run, and it did to the town what truth does to people who have built their comfort on a lie, which is that it made some of them ashamed and some of them angry, and the ashamed ones came around and the angry ones got dangerous. Asa Bell came around. He drove out in his freight wagon with his hat in his hands and stood in the yard and could not look at her and said, "Mrs. Voss, I said a thing in town in front of the boy, and it was a low thing, and I've been sick about it since I heard what you done in that fire. And I come to say I was wrong, and to say it where the boy can hear it, since I said the first thing where he could hear it." And he looked at Toby, who was standing on the porch, and he said, "Son, the woman that minds you is braver than any man in this valley, and I'm sorry I ever said otherwise." And he put his hat back on. But before he climbed back up to his wagon seat, he turned and added, lower, just to Verena, "There's a thing you ought to know, since you were square with me when you had no cause to be. I hauled freight for Royce Tillman the week before your fire, carried 4 tins of coal oil out to his line shack on the west boundary, and he told me to forget I'd done it. I'm telling you instead, and I'll tell the sheriff if you send him to ask me." And he drove off, and Verena watched him go and thought that this exactly was the thing her father had meant in the ledger about the small new world. You did not argue the loud men out of their loudness. You simply built, one day at a time, a world in which the truth was so plain and so heavy that they tripped over it and came around on their own, and then they brought you the last nail for the wall in their own hands. But Royce Tillman did not come around, because Royce Tillman had wanted the bottom land for 15 years, and a fat bride and a black horse had just made it look like he was not going to get it. And a man like that does not get ashamed, he gets organized. And Cyrus Pruitt did not come around, because Cyrus Pruitt had a buyer named Voss standing by, and a foreclosure on a schedule, and a reputation in Miles City that did not survive being made a fool of by a woman who read bloodlines. And so the two of them, the banker and the cattle baron, did what such men do when the honest road closes, which is look for a crooked one, and they found it, or thought they had, in the simple, brutal fact of the calendar. It was the 20th of October, and the note came due the 1st of November. And the horse money, plus the gold saved, plus what the spared herd might bring, still had to be in Pruitt's hand on the day, and Pruitt had quietly refused to grant a single hour's extension, and time, the falling number, was the one thing on this earth a fat bride and a brave horse could not gentle. 11 days, then 9, then 7. Verena's letter to the lawyer in Bozeman came back on the 6th day before the note fell due, and she read it on the wagon seat outside the post office with Toby beside her and her heart going like a hammer. And she read it 3 times to be sure she had it right, and then she folded it small and put it inside her dress against her heart, and drove home and said nothing to Holt about the whole of what it said, because a thing half shown is worse than a thing not shown at all, and she wanted to set it down whole in front of the men who needed to see it break them all at once on the day. So she waited, and she gentled her horse, and she watched the road, and the number fell. It was the 28th of October when the men came. The first to ride in was Cyrus Pruitt in his buggy, with Royce Tillman riding beside him on a tall sorrel, and a third man Verena had never seen but knew at once by the set of his shoulders and the cut of his coat, and the cold, flat way he looked at her from the buggy seat, knew him before Pruitt said the name, because she had grown up under that look. "Verena," her Uncle Peter Voss said, "you've gotten no smaller." Holt came out of the barn fast and stopped beside her, and Dewey came out of the bunkhouse, and Toby pressed himself against the back of Verena's skirt, and the 3 men in the yard looked down from their horses and their buggy at the 4 people on the ground with the contempt of men who have done their sum and like the answer. "It's the 28th, Pruitt said, pleasant as ever. 4 days. I've come to spare everyone the indignity of the auction. Mr. Voss here is prepared to purchase the note in full and assume the place, and to let Mr. Bannister and the boy keep the house and the dooryard and walk away whole. It's a generous offer, more generous than the bank is obliged to make. I'd advise you to take it." "And the cattle," Holt said, his voice tight, "and the bottom land, and the creek." "Those would come to Mr. Voss," Pruitt said. "Naturally, as part of the place." "There's no cattle to speak of, anyhow," Royce Tillman said from his sorrel, easy, smiling. "After that fire, a man can't bring a burned-out herd to auction. A man in Bannister's spot ought to be grateful somebody'll take the place off his hands at all." And there it was, the loud man saying the loud half out loud, and Verena let it hang in the air a moment so they could all hear what Royce Tillman had just told them he knew about a fire he had no honest way of knowing about. "That's a curious thing to know, Mr. Tillman," she said, "the state of our herd. You've not been on this land, and the herd didn't burn. Every head of it's alive in the creek bottom, which you'd know if you'd ridden the fence instead of paying a man to set the fire. She let that land, too. Asa Bell hauled 4 tins of coal oil to your West Line shack the week before. He's told the sheriff so. Dewey carried the empty tin we found at the fire start to Big Timber 3 days back, with what he knows about a drunk named Clemens and a dead drifter you paid to come hurt that horse. The law's already asking after you, Mr. Tillman. You came here today to gloat, and you walked into a yard that knows exactly who you are." Tillman's smile went flat. His sorrel shifted under him, and he did nothing to settle it. Peter Voss looked at his niece with something that was almost amusement. "I'll be honest with you, girl, since you were always one for honesty," he began, and Verena thought distantly, "No, you won't. You never have been. And I am done waiting." And she stepped forward 1 step in her blue dress with the boy's hand in hers, and she said, "You sent me here to break him." She said it plainly to her uncle in front of all of them, setting the words down flat and unhurried, a true thing she had carried inside her since Pennsylvania and had waited a whole hard autumn for the right yard to lay it down in. "You did your sum back in Pennsylvania. A man 3 payments behind, a dead-end horse, a dead wife, and a fat niece to be the last weight on the scale. You sent me out here to be the straw, Uncle, so you could buy this bottom land cheap once I'd finished sinking him, and you never once, not in your whole careful life, read the one paper that mattered." She turned, deliberate, to Pruitt. "And neither did you. You came to foreclose on a place, and you never read the deed book, and you never read the registration on that horse, and you never asked yourself one single question about whose name was on the bottom land, because you took it for granted, the way your whole comfortable kind of man takes everything for granted, that the dead woman didn't matter and never had." Pruitt's smile flickered. "The deed is held by the bank as security against Mr. Bannister's. The deed," Verena said, to the bottom land and the creek and the bloodstock was recorded in the name of Margaret Calder Bannister as her separate property, brought to the marriage from her own people, and recorded as her own in this territory's record office, where I read it with my own finger, deed page, and survey both, and bought clean copies of each. She drew the folded papers from her apron, the registration and the copies from the land office, and she held them up, not handing them over, only showing the men on the horses that the papers existed and were in her hand. Margaret Bannister died without a will, intestate. Under the law of this territory, her separate real property does not pass clean to her husband for his creditors to take. A controlling share of it is held in trust for her minor child until his majority. She put her free hand on the boy's head. This boy, Toby, the bottom land you've all been circling like buzzards for 2 years, isn't Holt Bannister's to lose. The best of it belongs in law to a 9-year-old, and you can no more foreclose it out from under him to pay his father's note than you can foreclose the sky. The yard went very quiet. Holt was staring at her with his mouth open. Pruitt had gone the color of paper. Royce Tillman's tall sorrel shifted under him, and he did nothing to settle it, because he was staring at the papers in Verena's hand. That would have to be proven, Pruitt said, but the pleasantness was gone now, scraped away, and under it was a frightened clerk who had built a foreclosure on an assumption and just heard the assumption crack. A court has, Verena said. I wrote to a lawyer in Bozeman the day I read those papers, a man named Albright, and his answer came in this week's mail, and here she drew out the lawyer's letter, the one she had carried against her heart for 6 days, and unfolded it. And he writes that the claim is sound, that the boy's interest in his mother's separate property is good in law, that the Calder family back east has already wired him their assent and their backing, and that he has already filed notice with the court at Bozeman to be appointed the boy's guardian ad litem on the petition of the boy's nearest competent relative by marriage. She let that one land, by marriage, and watched Holt's face change as he understood what she was telling him about what she had quietly become to that boy in the eyes of the law she had set in motion, and that any sale of the bottom land in disregard of the minor's recorded interest will be void, and any party purchasing it with notice of the claim. She looked straight at her uncle, then at Tillman, then at Pruitt. Will buy himself a lawsuit and a clouded title and nothing else for his trouble. You all have notice now. I just gave it to you, in front of witnesses. Dewey, by the bunkhouse, said, very softly, "Well, I'll just be," and took his hat off again. Peter Voss looked at his niece for a long, cold moment, and Verena watched her uncle do the only thing she had ever known him to do, which was a sum, and she watched him arrive at the answer, which was that the deal he had ridden 1,000 miles for was no deal at all, that he had bet on breaking a fat girl, and the fat girl had read the one paper he was too contemptuous to read, and that there was no profit to be had now, only cost, only a lawsuit and a clouded title and a public foolishness, and the company of a cattle baron the law was already circling, and that a man who deals in sums does not spend good money chasing a lost one in bad company. "You always were too clever for your own good," Peter said at last, and there was no warmth in it, but there was, almost against his will, a flat sliver of respect, the same kind Sorensen had shown when he watched her ride, the respect a hard man gives a fact he cannot move. Your father spoiled you with that book." "My father saved me with that book," Verena said. "And you'd have known the difference if you'd ever once bothered to read anything that wasn't a price." Peter Voss turned his horse without another word and rode out. And Royce Tillman, who had wanted the bottom land for 15 years and had just learned it was never going to be his at any price he could pay, and who had heard his name spoken in the same breath as the sheriff at Big Timber, sat his sorrel a moment longer, looking at the woman in the blue dress, and the boy, and the black horse in the corral beyond. And then he touched his hat once, the gesture a man makes when he has been beaten clean and is too proud to say so, and rode out after Peter, fast, like a man with a reason to be somewhere other than this valley. And Cyrus Pruitt, left alone in his buggy in the banister yard with his foreclosure in ruins, gathered his reins in hands that were not quite steady, and said, in a small voice with nothing pleasant left in it at all, "There's still the note's still due. The boy's land or no, Bannister still owes the bank $312 on the first, and the rest of the place. The house and the dooryard and the barn," Holt said. He had found his voice at last, and it was steady, and he stepped up beside Verena, so that the two of them stood shoulder to shoulder. "That part's mine, and I'll grant you, Pruitt, it's behind. But the bottom land's the boy's, and you can't touch it, and a bank that forecloses a man's house out from under a recorded miner's interest in the adjoining land it can't reach is a bank that's going to court too, and looking small in front of the whole valley while it does." He let that sit. "Or the bank takes its $312, which it'll have in full by the first every cent, and writes off nothing and keeps its good name, and we all go home." "You don't have it," Pruitt said. "You're short. I've seen your accounts. You couldn't have made it back with a burned herd." "The herd didn't burn," Holt said again, slow. "And the horse sold for $300 to a Helena man on a handshake, and $30 in gold already down. And what's still short of $312 after that, the boy's people back east have already wired to clear, because they'd sooner spend $12 keeping their grandson in his own house than lose it to a bank that tried to rob him. It's in Mr. Albright's hands in Bozeman. He'll have it to you by the first." Holt set his jaw. "You can wait 3 days for clean money, Pruitt, or you can spend the next 2 years in a courtroom explaining to a judge why you tried to take a dead woman's land from her orphan son. I'd think on it. My wife reads men the way she reads horses, and she tells me you got the set of a man who comes apart on the road." Cyrus Pruitt looked at her, and at Holt, and at the boy, and at the black horse in the corral who had run through fire, and he did his own sum, and it came out the only way it could, and he turned his buggy and drove out of the banister yard and never set foot in it again, and the bank took its $312 in full on the 30th of October, 2 days early, and wrote the note paid, and the falling number that had hung over the place all autumn long simply stopped falling and was gone. They stood in the yard, the three of them, after the dust of all of it had settled, in the long gold light of the last evening in October, and for a while nobody said anything, because there was too much, and because some things, said too soon, scare off. It was Toby who broke it. He looked up at Verena with his dead mother's gray eyes, and he said, "Is it true? Is the bottom land really mine?" "It's really yours," Verena said. "It was always yours. Your mother saw to it before you were old enough to remember her. You only needed somebody to read the paper that said so." The boy thought about that. Then he said, with the terrible directness of a child, "Are you going to stay? Or did you only stay because of the note?" And Verena Voss, who did not cry, who had cried exactly twice in this whole long autumn and both times in this yard, looked at the boy and then looked at the boy's father, and she found she could not answer the child because the answer belonged to the man, and the man had to be the one to say it, and she had waited the whole of the waiting and would not hurry this last thing either. Holt Bannister took off his hat. He stood there in the gold light with his hat in his hands, a hardened, decent man who had sworn off hoping and gotten ambushed by it at his own corral. And he looked at the woman he had insulted at his own gate 3 months before, the documented expert, the post that held the whole place up, the rider who had gone into fire when his own horses would not. And he said the thing plainly, the way she had taught him, the way she had taught the horse, the way her father's ledger said, "You finally," when the waiting was done, had to say the true thing out loud. "I looked at you at that gate," Holt said, "and I said you were heavier than the letter, and I have been ashamed of that every day since. And I'll be ashamed of it the rest of my life, because the letter never said the half of what you are. You read the horse nobody could read. You read the boy. You read the paper that saved his land. You rode through fire for cattle that weren't even yours to save, for a man who given you nothing but a back room with a bolt on the door. You did all of it, and you never asked me for one thing back." He stopped. His voice was not steady, and he did not try to make it steady. "I'm asking you for one thing now, Verena, and it's not as a hand. The note's paid. The land's the boy's. There's nothing left holding you here but whatever you want to be held by. So I'm asking you to stay, and I'm asking you to stay as my wife in truth and not on paper, and I'm telling you—" He looked at her, steady now, finally steady, "that you belong here. You've belonged here since the day you got off that wagon and told me my insults weren't located in your waistline. This is your place. You earned every acre of it that the boy doesn't already own. Stay." Verena looked at him for a long moment in the gold light. "I'll take that," she said, "the same way I told you to take your apology. In installments." But she was smiling when she said it, the wide, foolish, helpless smile, and she reached out and took his rough hand in both of hers, the hands that had gentled a killer horse and read a dead man's ledger and turned a herd out of a fire, and she held on. "Yes," she said, "I'll stay. I was always going to stay. I'd decided it somewhere around the day the horse pressed his head to my chest. I only needed you to catch up." And the boy whooped, and the black horse threw up his head and trumpeted in the corral as if he understood. And Dewey, watching from the bunkhouse door, put his hat over his heart for the 3rd time that autumn, and this time did not bother to hide that he was grinning like a fool. They were married in truth in the first week of November, in the house, with Dewey standing up for Holt and a kind preacher from Big Timber, and the whole valley invited, because Verena would not have it any other way. "Let them come," she said. "Let every one of them who laughed in front of the feed store come and stand in this house and watch, because a thing done in the open can never be taken back in the dark." And they came, most of them, even Asa Bell, hat in hand, and they ate at Verena's table and drank Verena's cider and watched her marry the man who had once measured her at his gate, and not one of them was laughing now. Sorensen came up from Helena with the rest of the horse money and the registration signed clean and stayed for the wedding, and called Verena the finest hand with a horse he'd seen in 30 years in front of everyone, and meant it. Word came, that very week, too, that the sheriff at Big Timber had ridden out to Royce Tillman's place with Dewey's tin and Asa Bell's account, and found Tillman already half-packed to leave the territory, and that a man who burns another man's pasture and pays drifters to lame horses does not stay welcome long in a valley once the valley knows. And that was the last the Bannister place ever had to think about Royce Tillman. And Toby stood beside his new mother in a clean shirt, with his hair wet-combed and gray eyes shining, and when the preacher asked who gave this woman, the boy unprompted said, "I do," and the whole room came apart, and Verena had to stop the ceremony for the fourth and last cry of that long golden autumn. The black horse, Errand, she did not part with after all. She rode to Helena and squared it with Sorensen face to face, gave him back his $30 with interest and the promise of the horse's first 2 foals out of the valley mares. And Sorensen, who was a horseman to the bone, understood without being told why a woman would not sell the horse that had carried her through fire, and shook her hand and called it a fair trade and a better bloodline bargain than the gelding besides. Errand stayed. He sired good foals out of the valley mares, and his stud fee paid down the house note clean inside a year, and he carried Verena over the bottom land that was the boy's, and would one day be the boy's children's, and he never crippled or killed another living soul, because nobody ever again came at him with a rope and a war in his face, and a horse, like a person, can put down a true thing he has learned about fear if you only build him, one patient day at a time, a small new world where the true thing isn't true any more. The ledger sat on the mantel where the dead wife's wedding band had hung. The band Holt had quietly buried with the shawl, down in the earth at the foot of the cottonwood, laying the old grief properly to rest at last, so that he could turn and pick up the next thing with both hands free. The leather-bound book her father had filled with 40 years of patience, the book her uncle had mistaken for a debt ledger and let her carry off without a fight, the transactional paper that turned out to be the most valuable thing she owned. It sat where everyone who came in the door could see it, and on cold evenings Verena read from it aloud, sometimes to the horse, and sometimes to the boy, and sometimes to the man, in her father's careful Dutch, the words about the smart horses who only learned that the world was a thing that hurts, and the small new worlds you could build for them, and the waiting, that was the whole of it. He wasn't only writing about horses, she told Toby one night, the way she had once told his father, the boy curled against her side, with the firelight gold on both their faces, and the man across the room mending tack and listening without pretending not to. He never was. What was he writing about then? Toby asked, sleepy. Verena closed the book and looked across the warm room at the man who had said, "You belong here," and meant it, at the place that had sent for a fat bride to break a broken man and gotten instead the post that held the whole thing up, at the whole gold improbable life she had built out of nothing but patience and a dead man's book, and the simple refusal to be measured by her waistline. People, she said. He was writing about people, Toby. He was writing about every soul anyone ever decided wasn't worth the bother. He was writing about me. She kissed the top of the boy's head. And it turns out he was right about all of us. Nobody's broken. We're only the smart ones, and the right person, the patient one, the one who comes to do nothing instead of something, that's the one who waits us out and builds us a small new world and turns out to have been right about us the whole entire time. She set the ledger on the mantel and banked the fire. Now, bed. The land'll still be yours in the morning, and the horse'll still be ours, and I'll still be here. She smiled. I was always going to be here. Some of you just took a while to catch up. And outside, over the bottom land that the bank could not take, and the uncle could not buy, and the fire could not burn, the November stars came out hard and bright over Montana, and in the corral the black horse, who could not be ridden, stood quiet under them, asleep on his feet, dreaming whatever it is that horses dream when they have finally, after a whole life of fear, put the true thing down, and in the gold-lit house the woman they sent to be a joke sat among the people who were hers now, who had been hers since she got off the wagon, and told a hard man that her worth was not located where he was looking for it, and was proven every single day after exactly, undeniably, gloriously right.